Yo, 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 what is going on, COD Familia? It is your boy BN, aka Mr. Kingdom Builder. And today, we have probably a somewhat unexpected take, but it will nonetheless be absolutely surprising and, I hope, very tantalizing of a conversation that we're going to be having today with Mr. Why don't you go ahead and just kindly introduce yourself, good sir?
Yeah, hey, what's going on, everybody? I'm Chisgule Gaming. You may remember me from such games as Rise of Kingdoms and Call of Dragons. And I really enjoy this game a lot. And I think the gameplay is top tier in this genre. And I'm really hyped to expand a bit on some of the stuff we were talking about on Discord, the state of the game, the state of kingdoms and its leadership, and, anything else you want to talk about.
No, absolutely. And I'm sure already faces are churning and mouths are wide open and braingasms are ensuing just based on the intro. And yeah, obviously for me, you and I have known each other for a little while, and I would say on a friendly basis. And over the time, I think I had first reached out to you back when I was playing Rock, and being able, I think if you recall, and this is one of the most interesting things, do you remember when I was playing, and I think I had initially met you when I was in 1196, and I still remember this. You were in the Legends Gaming Discord, and there was maybe about 2,000 people in there. Like, it was a pretty decent sized Discord, and there was a number of creators that were in there as well back when, oh gosh, why am I forgetting the names? It's Toots. Oh man, it starts with a T. Tukey. I think it was Tukey and a few other people, and like Azza was there, and a number of other people I'm probably forgetting, and Deeds for some of the names back there in that kingdom. But I remember when I had been playing there for a little while, I was kind of working my way up, kind of starting from a member and kind of working my way up the chain. I remember at a point, there was a lull and a downtime in the KVK, and there was a game called Brave Conquest, if you remember this, that
Yep.
I had reached out to you and a few other people about playing this game that came out, and it was something I had never played before, and I just remembered that engagement. I remember you had came over, and like a few other, I think Billy Bob OG from 1093, the whale with the very interesting mouth and take on him and his Kingsmails that he was very much known for, at least from my recollection. We had a few characters that were there as well. But yeah, that was one of my first times, I think, really interacting and engaging with you at that time. I don't know if you enjoyed the game that much. I know all of us kind of played it for a little bit.
Yeah, I think the game flopped, didn't it?
It did.
It's not even out there anymore. It looked cool. It was one of the first times I was like, huh, actually, you can make a game in this genre and it can look good and it can play pretty well and still completely flop.
No, absolutely. And it was, I remember it was just kind of a nice little downtime pass. I mean, that was kind of the feeling that I see, and I have been seeing from some of the COD kingdoms and Discords that'll pop in. I see a bunch of people in there. I mean, these are top kingdoms, and they're over here playing like Terrace Land. I think some people are playing Throne and Liberty, and I guess it's somewhat of the norm when there is a decent amount of downtime. But anyways, I digress. Let us, if we may, get into some of the nitty gritty here. And for me, I very much enjoyed. And again, and let me ask as well, because this is a question that I've gotten sometimes. Clearly, it is, because there's this thing where, and I don't know if it's a stigma, but there is this idea that, as you kind of get bigger and bigger in games, and obviously with your size as a creator within the genre, and very much in getting your start, at least from what I had seen with Kingdom Builders and Rock and potentially others before that, when it comes to the level of activity and or engagement that sometimes will happen on Discords and chatting or hopping into VC, etc. And my view is that it just feels like once you kind of get to a certain size, it's just a matter of prioritizing your time. And even as much as maybe one would like to. And I say all of this to say that obviously there's not too much like texting and posting that I know we've seen from you on the COD Discord. But when there is, it always feels as though it's meaningful. There's intent. There's a level of directness behind it. And you, especially with, again, the latest iteration that we saw, you were very open with wanting to share your views. And some of those, again, I've talked about in one or two videos, and I at least enjoyed it. Just it's almost the same idea how I enjoy when developers come out and share why they wanted to implement something. Like, what was their logic? What was their initial direction? What was their intent behind wanting to add, change, or remove something instead of just kind of getting the political patch notes sometimes, or the political answer announcement in a Discord channel, etc. And I guess, again, I know it kind of stemmed from Chief and a few people on the EIS side, or however many it may have been, and whatever may have exactly transpired, but it seemed like that was the catalyst for it. And then obviously it led into you diving into what I enjoy, which is some of these topical conversations that we really get a chance to kind of unpack, at least because my belief is that, more than 50% of the game very much is the day-to-day player experience and what people go through on a day-to-day basis that has almost nothing to do with leveling your account, finding the best pairings, optimizing for matchups, and going into KVK for the PvP. But it's really just like the day-to-day management and almost lifestyle environment that we see.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to react to there. So the first thing I'll react to is the sparse appearances in Discord. And I enjoy hanging out in Discord as much as the next person. But the challenge with being a content creator is you have to do the things that scale. And a conversation that will eventually fade into history doesn't have scalability. And so it's not generally a great use of my time. And I actually do prioritize, like, okay, so if I have time, I should put that to comments. Because at least in a comment, right, like that lives on for other people to hopefully see, enjoy, and get value from as well. And the thing that's farthest down on my list is things like popping into Discord or responding to DMs in game, because like who benefits from that? A much
what he's saying is he has no time for you
audience of one.
So yeah.
Right? Yeah. The other thing is that as a content creator, and I never really expected this, but it's like actually impossible to fathom how busy a content creator actually is if you're not a content creator. And even as a content creator that's grown moderately large, like almost 250,000 subscribers, when I listen to even bigger content creators talk about their schedules, I'm like, oh my God, I don't even know what busy looks like. And I work an insane amount, but work is a weird word because like it also involves playing the game. And like, yeah, like I actually play all the games I'm making videos about because I want to know what I'm talking about. And if you're not actually playing the game, you don't know what you're talking about, which brings us to what I popped into Discord to talk about, because I actually have the benefit of knowing the answer to a thing that a bunch of people seem to not understand. And that is the future of Call of Dragons and the state of the kingdoms in this game. And the sort of thing that sparked the fire is people getting sort of called out for taking pretty cowardly seasons. Top kingdoms all allying up and taking easy wins instead of real meaningful fights. And you saw this evolution in Rise of Kingdoms, and I talked about this in a recent video of mine, where originally, when global migration opened up and matchmaking across all the endgame servers in the game opened up, and you have these big KVKs, and now all these top kingdoms are fighting each other. Initially, they went the same route that we see here, where the kingdoms that are top ranked are afraid of losing. They're very afraid of losing, and so they ally with the strongest other kingdoms that are available, and they create these seasons that are really quite suboptimal compared to what they could be for a great endgame player experience. Because eventually, players stop caring as much about the personal account progression and care more about the actual gameplay of getting amazing KVKs. Why am I spending all this money in this game if my alliance leader is not going to actually give me an opportunity to enjoy it? And so you will encounter the situation where people will realize the leaders they're following cannot deliver to them the kind of experience they want. The real fighters will all leave these kingdoms that are artificially large only because they started large and they just got larger, but never have been contested because they've never taken a real fight. And so eventually the fighters will all end up where the real leaders are. And where are those real leaders? I don't know. And, look, I'm not trying to go after any of the, big
Yeah.
kingdoms. I actually don't know really any of the matchmaking stories beyond what I have experienced, but I've seen enough to say, oh, okay, I see what's happening here. Let me tell you what happens next if you keep on the path that you're on. And my intent here is not to actually knock these leaders, but maybe to inspire a little bit of wisdom in the approach they take to future seasons, where you actually talk to your opponents about what good would look like, find alignment, and then take that fight. And I'll sort of close that thought by giving an example that, like, right now I'm in one of the top KVKs that Rise of Kingdoms is going to see all year. And it's easily a top 3 KVK. I'm like, why is that the case? Well, the two, big dogs in that KVK are not allying each other. They're fighting each other. And then a tier below that, you've got the other kingdoms that are, pretty major drop in the sort of punch level. But hey, they're sort of matched up evenly as well. And so you've got this like really cool situation where you don't know who's going to win. And that's a part of what makes this game really fun, right? Like, you think you've had fun when you get wins and hold the dragon. You don't even know what fun feels like until you have a hard-earned victory.
No, I mean, it is. There's a lot there. I obviously so many great places to start. I think. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think boiling it down, maybe trying to hone in on one area, I would say the KVK diplomacy portion is usually the beginning stages, as we know, before you even get into any of the nitty gritty. Like, just being able to collect everyone into a private Discord server or a private group DC and just getting all of the representatives there to actually start a conversation. And as you've said, and as I had mentioned, I remember in one of my posts when you had made a couple of your posts and then activity started booming a bit on the Discord, as it could only imagine to do so. There was a number of people, and it was funny because I saw when, I think it is a video I reacted to of yours, when you did the post and you said something to the effect of, yeah, I was somewhat shocked that so many people that usually don't agree with me effortlessly agreed with me in these posts. And that was kind of evident in the number of reactions that they got to as well when speaking about some of these biggest kingdoms taking easy matchups. And I just, again, because I've done some of the data on some of the KVK groups, and I don't know if you saw the video I did where I looked at where I asked all the leaders, all the KVK diplomacy reps and or R5s from the Noor Echo KVK on, how did KVK diplomacy go? And I was just somewhat appalled because, for me, coming from Rock, like yourself, and others that have played Rock, and again, granted, Rock has some years, right, some wisdom under its belt for the amount of time it's been out, there's obviously been a learning curve, and you have kind of stabilized to a point where people have good standards and good practices now compared to maybe a little bit more of the younger span, even though you can still make the argument that CoD, there's a lot of obviously similarities between Rock and it, and it's not as though Kingdom Builders are necessarily a brand new thing. But I'm sure you still will find some players and those in leadership that are newcomers in maybe a number of areas. But it was just shocking to me that the consistent responses I got from almost all of the leadership teams in that KVK, which was the number 2 strongest KVK, but effortlessly the most popular and probably the most viewed KVK within that SOS2 for the Winter is Upon Us season, is that they said 3 things. One is that everyone did join the Discord, but nobody submitted any actual matchup recommendations. Nobody said, hey, these kingdoms should be with these people. These should be with them. This is why. And then number 2, nobody shared any data. Nobody said, well, this is why, like giving some kind of support to why the matchup is being submitted, why it's being recommended, where's the data, at least from anyone, even if it's just one thing that you're offering, aside from things like activity and other intangibles, at least being able to have something of face value. And then number 3 was that, and I'm sure this is something you've seen a number of times, and at least I've in my experience with looking at KVKs is sadly just been something that I've always felt, listen, this can happen, and at times it will, is that you had some kingdoms that just already came in pre-grouped up. And to me, that just spells, I mean, to me, that almost makes it seem like those are the three either absolute worst things that can happen to destabilize and not go in earnest to KVK diplomacy conversations, or they're near the top.
I mean, I'll say that the game has changed and the players haven't. And that's the real issue here, right? The game has changed, but the players haven't. And as people who have been in this genre for a while and played such a close mirror to this game, Rise of Kingdoms, we have the foresight of having seen what will happen, right? I feel like a fortune teller here, but like we know what is going to happen here, right? Yep. It is very predictable.
Rub my
Not
lamp.
because we're geniuses, but because we can see a very, very simple pattern, right? And, you know, even if certain kingdoms act very childish in diplomacy, which I have seen before, top kingdoms act very childish. They show up to the conversation at least, and you may or may not be able to arrive at an outcome. But like, to your point, the fact that conversations aren't even happening is insane. The fact that folks are showing up pre-allied is insane. And it makes sense in the previous version of the world where you could only migrate people in from the people you're in season with. Mm-hmm. You want to make a good impression. I get it. Winning rather than losing makes that easier. I get it. But like, the world has changed, my friends, and everybody is watching. And when you take really, really lame seasons, people aren't going to line up at the door to sign up for your next super lame season.
Yeah. I think the thing for me that almost feels so disheartening, and these are some things I've spoken about, is it feels to me as though the leadership teams for some of these groups are more so worried about, and again, this is the impression I get, it feels as though they're more worried about optics rather than fulfillment. And what I mean by that is fulfillment of their players. Understanding that as a leader, as someone who's in management, you are a steward. You are a part of your job is to make sure that your group of players in your alliance and hopefully within your kingdom are fulfilled. They are getting their fill. They are enjoying the KVK for as many days as humanly possible out of the duration of the season, versus what it feels like some kingdoms and or alliances prioritize, which is more optics, in whether that is taking easy wins, taking matchups that have a little bit more advantage, where you have a little bit more of a cushion or kind of a bracing period, or I guess a bracing amount that just allows for you to kind of edge out fights, and you kind of go into it knowing that, fully aware of what you're doing, where it just almost feels as though those situations can also cause a level of demotivation from what other alliances or maybe the other side would be seeing. I mean, how many people have something that happens in a home kingdom, and you have, you know, again, albeit jumper groups that are landing in the same kingdom, where you have big players that are powering up and spending a decent amount of money, and how many times do you see people stop fighting just because someone is so much bigger than them in a home kingdom? And it just kind of makes it seem to me that position is almost exacerbated when we see that in KVK, and how just that visual effect can really demotivate one side or the other. And I'm curious on your thoughts on that, if you see it in a similar way or different.
Well, it's funny because the alliance I've been with since the beginning holds completely the opposite priority. So you're right, a lot of these groups prioritize the optics. Our group prioritizes the experience. We basically like, screw it. People are going to talk shit about us no matter what. So we're going to do what's right for us, and we're going to have a damn good time doing it. Yep. And so, it's funny to watch in our last season, folks be critical of like, why didn't you take this stupid position and fight dumb in a really dumb way that you can't win? And, we instead just looking at the season and sort of as it evolved, what it was becoming, it was obvious. There wasn't even sort of a 1 or a 2% chance to turn it into a W. It's like we find our own fun throughout the season and we fight like crazy. And a lot of people in our group said it was the most fun season they've ever had, even though it was the stupidest Diplo you've ever seen, right? Because there was no Diplo. It was just one-sided, lock somebody out, claim your easy win, no Kingsland fight. And like, if you haven't ever had a Kingsland fight, maybe you just don't understand why those are so fun. But like, you should want to have one of those. So anyways, what I'm driving at is, we just sort of took the fights to where we wanted them to be. And that was extremely enjoyable. And, at one point we had the opportunity to cut a really, really poorly constructed flag line. And that flag line happened to be from a kingdom that had betrayed us in the past, which is just so beautiful to zero so many of their cities because they didn't do some like basic 101 level construction of territory. Man, it was a really good time to just be this unpredictable, hard-hitting force. And we had a ton of fun, even though the situation was really silly from a setting up a great season standpoint. We sort of make the best of it. So I think you're absolutely correct that a lot of people think too much about the optics and are not as focused on their members' enjoyment of the season. And you can still be in a losing season and have a lot of fun. In fact, some of the most fun I've had in city building war games came from losing the seasons where we did stuff that people thought was just completely unexpected. I think my genuine best season in Rise of Kingdoms ever was a season we lost where a bunch of really large kingdoms teamed up in a way that anyone could look at and see was really stupid. So everybody knew they were just taking an easy route. Everybody knew, right? But we fought into 2 war camps with R1 and we were winning and it was so fun, right? And everybody who was there looks back on that as a really proud moment. And so it's just a bummer for these folks that are missing out on some of the greatest possible situations they could create in these games, and they don't even realize it because they're not even creating those situations for themselves. They never experienced it. They wouldn't know that, like, oh, hey, wait a minute, you mean holding the dragon at the end isn't everything? Actually enjoying the game is fun too.
Billy Bob Thornton. That is such an interesting line that I at least appreciate hearing, not only because it's something that I've stated before, but it's just refreshing to hear someone else that at least has that view of, listen, the dragon is not absolutely everything. And, so I've gone as far to say that, I kind of view victories in a couple different sets, right? I view and I understand it's kind of like Civilization. If you've played Civ, where you have these different types of victories that you can win, right? It's like a domination, it's like a space race, it's influence victories, religious victories. Like you can have these different types of victories or win conditions. And in CoD, my view, even when I was playing Rock, but obviously a lot more in CoD recently, is I've kind of taken this stance, and again, I did get a little bit of slack for it when I did make this, because this was during, if you may recall, this was like the TFS and the BXS EIS season that went down. And there was just, again, a lot that went on. But basically, the Cliff Note version is that both of the, and there's another alliance that I'm completely forgetting right now, if it was TDR or someone else, so please don't crucify me, peeps out there. But essentially, both the sides made it to the final zone. This was back on the ST1 map, right? So that updated Tamaris map for Season of Strife. And you ended up seeing both sides get to the final zone, and they got to one of the 3, but basically this was the middle choke, where on the northwest side of the choke, there was the dragon, and on the south side of the choke was not the dragon. And the dragon wasn't centralized as it is now, which is one of the critiques that was given. And they thankfully had made some of those adjustments, along with trying to improve the flag distance from each of the gates to the dragon to try and equalize that a lot more. Because again, the numbers were sadly not that is the easiest way to say it. But in that season, I had stated that so people basically just said like that EIS and BXS had just won flat out. My stance was that they didn't win flat out. They had a objective victory. Like they had a victory via dragon, essentially, is another way to say it. But they didn't have a war victory, right? Which to me, and what I usually see in a lot of KVKs, and maybe this might differ in Rock. So again, I'd be curious to hear your thought on that. Is where I usually see, like up until you've had this stance, most unions or groups will usually push one side out of the final zone, whether that's a Kingsland or your FZ or your Zone 4, etc. Usually they're pushing them all the way out. It's not oh yeah, we'll just let you chill, with the exception of if both sides are kind of equally matched and there's just this long standstill of they're just constantly fighting, but no one's really kind of pushing one person out or the other. And I remember when I stated this, I ended up getting a decent amount of flack, obviously from one side more than the other. And it was just like, that's again what they had felt. And I didn't mean anything negative or no ill intent or no shade to be thrown. It's just, I think what really sparked it for me was the amount of, and I don't want to say trash talk, I want to say competitive banter. The amount of competitive banter that I saw happening in Kingdom chat or KVK chat was, and posts that I had saw in the general Discord, where it's like they're going back and forth at each other, and it's like, oh, we won the season, you lost, you suck, losers. Like, I mean, whatever it may have been. To me, it just felt like, man, like they're going like one side. It just felt like it was going so hard for some of the messages I saw. And obviously, this is, it's not like, I'm not saying that one thing kind of poisons the whole well at all. But it just felt like I saw a number of those, and I thought that it was important to just clarify that it's like, look, like nobody really pushed each other out. Like, yeah, you did get the W, but let's not make it seem like you steamrolled them. And that was really more my position. And I'm curious if that's something that you usually see for a lot of the KVKs that you watch and rock, if there's similarities there, if it's a little different.
So with regard to who wins and who loses, I mean, I think it, to me anyways, like, winning the season means that you hold the dragon at the end. Mm-hmm. And to quote, Ricky Bobby, no one remembers second place.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think, when we talk about like who won the season, like, well, did you hold the dragon or not? But like, we talk about like who's winning the game. Well, now we can have a different conversation that's kind of interesting. Like, what happened to your kingdom as a result of that season?
Yeah.
Is a really interesting conversation. Because at the end of the day, it's a kingdom builder. So if you win the season, but your kingdom falls apart, like, was that really worth the trade-off?
Okay.
Right? And you can take hard fights, and coming from experience, okay, you can lose the season and not lose your development as a kingdom and your growth as a kingdom. But these are two different things, and I think people get them confused, to your point about optics, because sure, like, it looks good to hold the dragon at the end, but you know what looks even better? Actually being a badass fighting kingdom. That looks pretty good. Because at the end of the day, I think people are way more afraid than they admit to how they want to handle when they align with BDO, and pretty much every MFer in this alliance is going to kill off their troops to wreck your position. Right? And like, maybe you'll be fine, but do you really want to find out is an interesting question. Someone will, right? Someone will, but most seem to think that that's so scary that they don't even want to have to take a fair fight where that is a reasonable thing for us to commit to even doing, right? And then when we do sit down at a pass and it's like, here, dude, the folks we were fighting against, they had the opportunity for their 1v1 for like a week, and they were like, nah, it's all good.
We're good.
They had more than a 1v1. They could staff people over the pass, and they just from an ally who had access to they didn't take it, man. They didn't want that heat. So, like, look, I forget. Oh yeah, we're talking about winning and losing. I mean, people just got to stop being afraid of taking a loss. Like, speaking from personal experience, having taken lots of losses, but also plenty of wins. I'm on a nice win spree on my Rise of Kingdoms accounts right now. Like, the losses can be some of the most fun you have in the game. The key is to take the good fights. Nope. And if you've done your work, then you win the good fights. And if you've really done your work, you win the good fights even when you're at a disadvantage. But that doesn't mean you can offset a catastrophic, insane disadvantage, typically. Right? We're talking about a reasonable disadvantage, not like one kingdom versus however many, and they're all, top tier and they all allied with each other, whatever.
Yeah.
I think you get the idea.
Yeah, probably it's more like something that has probably a percentage margin of difference where it's, maybe if it's within 5% or 2% of having maybe more 100 mil players or more mid-high spenders, or maybe having a more general average or higher peak average activity, maybe on up times or down times. Yeah, like going into some of those X factors and intangibles and what we'd consider is a healthy allowance of maybe a small
Right.
differential that would still allow
Let
for
me
you to compete.
hijack with a slight topic change.
Yeah, sure. No,
About
please.
power, because people are afraid to lose power. So let's run that
Okay.
to an extreme, right? So your kingdom's ability to migrate players in is based on a number of factors. We assume power is one of them, right? Well, if everybody's power is constantly going up, but the threshold for what a kingdom's total punch level can be doesn't change, that means that over time you can only have fewer and fewer people come in because everybody's power is going up and up and up. And if you take that to an extreme, right? Do you want, this is going to be really obvious the way I'll frame this, but if you have, 10 people at a billion power, or 100 people at 100 million power, right? Who's winning? The 100 people are winning.
Yep.
Every time, right? You can't win with 10 people. So in Rise of Kingdoms, people figured this out, and they've come to appreciate the balance that's required in dropping power to maintain your power level. But in Call of Dragons, people are still in that mindset of I'm going to grow until I'm a billion power. And it's okay, I guess, if that's what you want to do. But growing for forever is not actually sustainable. And the kingdom that finds ways to lose their troops, thus drop power, then thus can bring more people in, theoretically, we don't know the exact details of how migration works, is eventually going to be in a great position because, as we all know, more people online for the fight is going to mean more victories, right? Typically.
No. And again, so, I know that off of, for those, again, if anyone's logged in, right, they can see I'm showing this on the screen right now, but, and they've come out and said this before, right? The total influence or the total kingdom power, right, is determined by your personal influence, which is off of your hero development, your artifacts, legions, buildings, and tech. And those are the 5 factors that they apply now. Before, it was more than that. When they initially came out with it, it was a number of other things. It was current power, the amount of power you've gained, merits, the amount of PvP and deaths and salves. I mean, there was a number of other things that factored in, but they've kind of simplified it to those 5 things, and they break those down. But to your point, it almost seems as though the kind of ideals, it almost seems like the best way or the best approach is basically if you ended up having, because essentially what you're talking about is us kind of min-maxing and basically trying to get as much overall activity in for players that are willing to take deads, understanding that if you're going to fight in the KVK, it's almost like this perfect kind of rinse, wash, repeat cycle where you bring in as many active players as you can at, let's say, a lower average power. If it's 100 mil, if it's 75, 80 mil, but those players would be willing to train as many troops as possible, whether that's through free-to-player spending means in order to prep for that KVK, and then be sure that they are they either have killed off enough troops or they're willing to delete troops before the next migration window opens, right? To basically min-max and take advantage of each season to get as much fighting as possible without being at, 500 million, a billion plus power, right? Unless they're able to spend that much or they have that much saved up and they can train that much for that KVK. But kind of almost do something. And again, that's a very extreme situation, I should add. But that to me kind of feels like the ideal set that everyone would almost kind of want to be at, because it allows for you to essentially stay under what would be considered to be an imp or an Imperium Kingdom cap and or a full status Kingdom cap in COD, where you still have the opportunity to keep bringing more people in, and then you're able to kind of swap anyone you need to, or if you need to make adjustments here and there. But yeah, and again, there's something I want to add on to that as well, but I thought that was, I think overall just a good point to bring up, because I think it's something like you're saying where you have a number of people that are in, and just to kind of talk about an elephant in the room, which is, and I'm curious what your take is on this, because I've had this conversation with a couple people so far. And I guess before I dive there, was there anything you wanted to say back for what I had said?
Yeah, so
Okay.
I mean, in Rise of Kingdoms, there's this idea that, don't train what you can't kill. And in top kingdoms, like, they don't want you to gain power. They want you to be a demon in the field and have an appropriate level of power. And the people that figures out what appropriate is the officers, based on what they need to do to migrate people in. Because once you understand how impactful it is to have more people in your kingdom, you realize that your small amount of troops that you have on top is never going to be as valuable as having more people online fighting, rallying, garrisoning, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so someone actually made a comment on my video that I thought was really sophisticated, where they pointed out that the value of a game that has been out longer is that people value their experience more than their account progression.
Okay.
Right? And so when you care more about your account progression, aka accumulating more troops, and like, yeah, obviously you want to avoid situations where you're losing troops. But when you let go of holding on to all your troops, it's very freeing. And I'm not saying be a bozo with them, right?
Yeah.
Like, we're still talking about very efficiently using them to, harm the position of your enemies. But like, it is, I think, potential. Well, how do I want to say this? The thing that makes this weird in Call of Dragons is the free healing. And I'll add to that by saying that, people have some comments that are like, we don't want this game to be exactly the same as Rise of Kingdoms. And I totally get that.
Yeah.
I think the weirdness, though, is that as long as migration is looking at power, aka troops, as a factor, then this is going to be on the table for the conversation as to how to min-max the migrations in. And what do top kingdoms need to do? They need to min-max 100%. They have to, or they will not be top for long.
Yeah.
Right? That's how that goes.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think we've already kind of seen a trend of that when we look at where TFS was, and where they basically peaked. And I'm sure you remember that season 2, was it 2-3 seasons ago, where they basically botched the kingdom power cap, and they just allowed people. This is still when you could bring in 300 people before they nerfed that and cut that in half to now you can only bring in 150 people max. That basically they essentially removed the cap is what it felt like. Some people said they raised it to 40 billion, but essentially to me it appeared that it was uncapped, and anyone who kind of took advantage of that was able to get as many people in as possible. But TFS basically peaked around 37 billion, and now they're they're still within the 23. I think is still within the top 10, but they might be out now because I think some people from ANCS had left and gone somewhere else. But then you ended up having Kingdom 5 that was up there, and some people have left or they've done some purging. And then you had EIS, which is Kingdom 61. They're the number one kingdom, at least as of the last top 25 data set I pulled. And now you're hearing about some people might be leaving them from some of their group. And so I think to your point, yeah, everything is kind of ever changing. And it is, I guess it's curious to me because one of the things, at least on the migration point, is, and this is, and again, I'm curious on your thoughts for this take, is that, and I've said this a number of times before, my view is that when you are prioritizing recruiting essentially from a pool that is arguably the top 1% or the top 0.1% of players, meaning higher powered players on average, people that probably are more in that mid to high spending realm, and you're bringing in higher players, and then you end up getting capped earlier by getting to full status quicker, which we've seen from a number of kingdoms that they've done this to. And then some of those same kingdoms complain about the cap, about, oh, well, we were only able to bring in a few people from our group of 50, or we were only able to bring in half of the people from this group of 100, or, wow, this system is so shy. Why were we only able to bring in a handful of people, or 5 or less, and, we still have other people, and then they're complaining about it. And my thought, simply put, is you're just doing that to yourself. Like, that's what you get when you're only recruiting high-powered players. You're going to hit the power cap that much faster compared to if you recruited, which is again something that you just said, right, when you were making that comparison of, are you going to take on 10, a billion players, or 10 500 million players versus 100 mil players. It's the same logic behind it, as much as what you're trying to do to stay in a position with your kingdom status so you can bring in the most amount of active players as possible. But you have some kingdoms that have basically been doing this for a while, and I feel like maybe some other, and some haven't, and I think more and more are starting to understand this. But that, I guess to me, it just seems so obvious. It's like you're shooting yourself in the foot. Like, you can't have your cake and eat it too. And it feels like some of the kingdoms and some of the alliances were very much on that side of the fence, which is like, why won't they just let me bring in, like, it's almost like they really just wanted no cap to exist so they could bring in anyone and everyone they wanted to. Like, from what I recall, in the early days of Rock's migration, at least for the time when I was in 1196, where it was like this wild west of like, let's just bring in as many people and the strongest people that we possibly can. And then they're over here like left holding the stick in their hand, wondering, well, why, at least for COD, why can't I now bring in a lot more people? Why did I hit the cap so fast? And to me, it's just, I don't know. To me, It's just so common on why it happened. But I'm curious what you think on that.
So yeah, I mean, I think I have a pretty clean take here, which is that in Rise of Kingdoms, at any moment in time, you can calculate for yourself where you are in the Imperium ranks. Okay. And if you're above a certain amount of power, just so people understand that don't play Rise of Kingdoms, then you can't bring in people that are high power anymore. So the whole game for kingdom management is ensuring that you leave Imperium status, bring in the people that you want, and then re-enter into Imperium status. And you do that by cheating the number of troops that are in your hospital. And that is also a weirdness, but it works. And the reason that whole system works is because anyone with the information can predict exactly what their migration will be. There's no mystery. And I think the thing that is potentially miffing players, as you described it, is the mystery associated with, can we get people in? And that mystery leads people to engage in like very intense hopium. Right? Okay. Intense hopium that their migration is going to work, because that's all they have.
Yeah,
is hopium.
Is their prayers.
And then when it doesn't, they're upset. And like, I learned this especially recently, that player expectations are absolutely critical. Mm-hmm. And the context for this particular thing was completely different. This was actually in Age of Empires Mobile, where we're playing in this server, and long story short, I think when player expectations change, even in like agreements with other players, right? Mm-hmm. There's like a misunderstanding about what reality
is. Is this the CC server you're talking about, the special one they did?
Yeah. Okay. it can be very upsetting to people. And it's easy for those misunderstandings to happen. So all that to say, I know in COD there's a new feature that you can simulate, like, hey, if we migrate these people in from our kingdom, how does it impact the migration status? I think you made a good point recently, which is that really that, and I may have made this point as well in one of my videos, that like the migration needs to showcase the total migration of all players from all kingdoms to see if you can make it happen. Right? Yeah. Like that way you can actually just push the migrate button, and all those players that signed up to come in all come in at the same time, and it happened. Yeah. Right? Remove the hopium.
Yeah.
And in Rock, you don't have this situation because players can calculate it for themselves.
Yeah.
And there's still some mystery as to what other kingdoms are going to do, because it's all relative power. Yeah. But like, I think that would be really valuable to players, specifically. I mean, for all players, really, to be able to groom and grow the communities as you dream them up, and not get caught in the sucky situation of having a group split. And then Chisgule says you had hopium, like
no, understood.
And BDO very intentionally, when the migration option was there to like bring in a gazillion people, like we kept it small. We stuck to people that we thought would be a great fit, and we feel really rewarded by those choices to like bring in only people that were a solid fit. So, anyways,
Again, I think I guess it's interesting when you're able to sit down and talk with people that have some similar like-minded approaches, even where there are healthy differences, to kind of see where someone else is coming from a different perspective. But at least with this in mind, it feels very aligned in having what we probably often would say are realistic expectations versus unrealistic. I want to switch gears for a sec, because we were talking briefly, or you had mentioned something a little while ago about setting player expectations. And I wanted to circle back real quick to this KVK approach of when you said that, you can still kind of win even if you lose a season, from what actually transpires, what happens over a KVK season, even if you're not the one capturing dragon. And what I often find for me, because again, I've done a number of like big jump project managements and or just jump project groups that I've done across Rock, Infinity Kingdom, and COD now. And one of, I believe, is probably the most important characteristic of managing a group and or managing a kingdom, managing an alliance, etc., is being able to set appropriate and early expectations for the group. So this way you're not succumbing to this kind of impulsive or quick reactions or fast turnover of a response or a shift in the wind. And what I specifically mean by this is, if you're going into a KVK and you take the time to start prepping everyone in your KVK via kingdom mails, alliance mails, maybe you're doing town halls for your kingdom, and you're letting everyone know well in advance that your entire objective, even though, yes, it would be great to win the season and capture the dragon, the most important priority or goal that we want to achieve for the group is to make sure that everyone has a fulfilling season. And what does that entail? Well, that entails you being able to get as many overall days as possible of healthy PvP between those that we could potentially fight. Everyone gets an opportunity to get a lot of merits. Everyone gets an opportunity to buy out the shop or to get as many rewards as you can there. Being able to get as many objectives as we can for individuals, the alliance, and for the warband, or i.e. the kingdom. And kind of looking at these things and basically setting these early expectations, so that way, even if you don't get the dragon, you don't end up having this feeling of resentment or this negative perspective that kind of almost festers like a seed because of the fact that you didn't capture the dragon, and you can still walk away with getting something that still feels like wins or victories in other areas. I'm curious, and again, this is something I have seen before, and I've seen that if you do it appropriately and you do it right, it can be such a positive and uplifting level of fulfillment towards the end of a KVK season, even if you still get some people that are disappointed. I'm curious on if you've seen this happen in Rocks, and just kind of your general thought on it.
Yeah, I mean, so I have a couple thoughts.
Okay.
Right? Like at the end of the day, winning, in my opinion, is whoever held the dragon.
Yep.
Right? Like, they won the season. But to your point, there are other important things to go along with it, right? Like, there is such a thing as a hollow victory, and a lot of kingdoms seem to seek out the hollow victory now. But when I look back on my experiences in Rise of Kingdoms in particular, I look to seasons that we lost, and they were so memorable and fun. And I think there are a lot of things that you can still get done within a season, even if it is ridiculous from the onset, aka a loss in Diplo, which can be completely out of the control of your kingdom, whether or not that happens. And I feel like in this last season in particular, I take no credit for this. This is like entirely the other officers from BDO, but like, they did an incredibly good job in setting the tone for what we were going to do, being clear about like, hey, like, here's kind of what we're up against, and it's not an easy season. And like, I think it is important to be, and it's very difficult to do, but to be truthful with your members and set the right expectation for like what's going to happen. And at the start of our season, right, like we're going to play to win, we're going to go for the win, and if that's not possible, like we're going to take the fights we want to take, and we control when and where that happens. And that is what led to the season being really, really fun. Like we at some point it's like we have nothing to lose, which makes us very dangerous. And then we zeroed like 30 cities, right? Like and it's not an exaggeration. Like we cut their land, we zeroed 30 cities, and it was light work, you know, and that sort of stuff is really memorable and for us and them, I'm sure. And then you got people crying like, oh, how could you zero cities? The season's over. And it's like, oh my God, the season is anything but over. The fat lady, she's only singing when you get sent to home kingdom, buddy.
No, I mean, God, that could be just so many topics in and of itself on people that are not accountable and understanding that you are essentially in a war zone the moment that you get into a zone in a KVK with other alliances that are not your friends.
No, that's exactly right there. They are not your friends, bro. Right? Like they are not there to hold your hand. Yeah. Like you make a mistake, like it's GG's. And you know, when your leadership messes up your territory, like a lot of people get cooked. And you know, there are some honest mistakes that get made. I mean, I can't tell you how many KVKs I've been in where this is now Rise of Kingdoms, where like you have to delete a fort to place another one, and somebody deletes the wrong fort, and it's like, oh, jeez, you know, like, you know, silly things happen to the best of us, but you got to own those mistakes. And yeah, anyways, I think to your point about like victories, right? There's plenty of victories to be had, even if you're not holding the dragon at the end of the season. And, you know, one of those victories is in the form of the experience while you're in the season. Another is the memories you'll have from that season. And another would be the impact it has on your ability to migrate in other people. Because I've been in these seasons where, like, we lose. And, you know, this happened with Smash Squad and Rise of Kingdoms. And we don't get much credit for this, which is kind of funny. People are very allergic to giving that credit where credit is due, but we had just amazing stats. That criticism. Well, we had just these really amazing stats. Not to pat ourselves on the back, I will pat us on the back because we deserve it for this. But we had these amazing stats where we were just a shocking percentage of this kingdom's contribution with just like 25-ish people, and like we had everybody courting us to migrate to their kingdom. When people saw those stats, they were like, "Oh shit!" Like you had like almost half the kingdom's contribution with just like 25, 26 people. Like, please join our kingdom. Oh, and like all the big kingdoms were courting us mostly. Okay, so you know you can have losses and still emerge with some really cool outcomes. And you know, why am I saying that? I don't know. It's not. I guess it's in response to your question of, you know, like what is winning mean in there. And so again, I'll double back and say, like, I think holding the dragon at the end, winning, but there's a lot of other important areas where you need to win too. And it's really easy to win dragon but lose in those other areas.
Do you worry at all? And this is an add-on because there is at least one other thing I want to get to, but I want to do a quick add-on here. How do you feel about this idea? Because this is something that has been trending a little bit in a number of KVKs, where there's this idea of basically fast building to turtle, where you will basically, if you have, you know, let's say you have two evenish sides as they're entering a final zone, and you have both sides, or maybe one side over the other, that is more prioritizing, let me build as fast as we can to get to this choke point. We're only going to defend it because this choke point is like, i.e. on the side of the dragon, or maybe has some other objectives that are over there, and we're not going to attack. We're just going to defend.
Yeah.
To me, I just want to state real quick, to me it feels as though that is a disservice not only to the way the game was intended to be played for the amount of PvP, but also for the style of play that COD focuses on a little bit more, at least when it compares to Rock. And again, that's just kind of a highlighted view, but I'm curious on what your thought is on that, and if you've seen anything like that happen in Rock, where that type of mindset played out, and if you felt like, okay, did this really do a disservice, or no, this is actually just kind of a standard way that it's played, and even though people might feel some kind of way about it, it just is what it is at this point.
Yeah, I think it's never the player's fault to play the meta.
Okay.
So if the meta is to get to a position and defend, like that's not the player's fault. Now that might not be the best game design, and it might be more fun if it were designed differently. But if that's not the design, then that's not the design, right? Like, I don't like that we were fighting against a kingdom that could just place a bastion, and no matter how much we rallied and traded even or positive, like the rate of loss was so low that we couldn't get past them. But I don't fault them for playing the meta, but I didn't like that meta, right? And so I actually don't fault anyone for playing the meta. And I wish more kingdoms had the strength of leadership to identify and play those metas, quite frankly. As weird as that may sound. Like in Rise of Kingdoms, when we were up against 1960 and 1093, and it was this KVK where like we were clearly going to be outmatched, I had the really unpopular opinion, but I still feel like with the right strength of leadership would have been the right play, that like we should just sit back in our starting zone, wait till everybody else is beat the snot out of each other, and then and only then enter in. And like, is that the lamest way to play it? Absolutely. But would that have maximized our chances of actually ending up with a winning outcome, where winning is defined as like holding some of the objectives at the end? Yes. Like, we would have been fresh. We would have hit actually incredibly hard and done a lot of damage. And like, that's not what we did. But I think to your point about like, sometimes the meta is unpopular, that is what it is. I don't fault people for playing the meta. And like, sometimes you just need to, if you want to win, you have to play what's meta. And that gets the best outcome for your group, and it just kind of is what it is.
Yeah.
So, but to answer your question of like, do I like infinitely holdable, strategic defensive positions? No, I don't think that's good for the game when you can like create this stalemate that like is very boring, and like defense is already so advantaged, I think, with the way that choke points work, right? And the territory you can create, that I don't think it's healthy for the game state to make it so you can have these forever lasting choke points, which, with barriers and the way the game used to work, like do you remember just how littered maps would be with barriers? Like, you'd get to a position and then it'd be so entrenched that like everybody just gives up on pushing, which I think too much defense meta, right? Like it's too good to defend.
Yeah, it was the same thing with so with the barricades and then the turrets, right? So you'd have people that would basically layer almost every point they could with barricades and turrets, whether it was across a bridge, if it was at the top of a ramp or the bottom of a ramp, or if it was just on the opposite side of a choke that maybe they just happened to place their fort or a keep there, and then they would just kind of build around it. And yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because my initial response to when I was seeing all this happen was, listen, it's not that I didn't like, I liked this idea of barricades. I liked that they had this kind of crowd control effect of just applying a slow. But my whole view was I felt that they should be tactically used, not used as we're just going to throw paint everywhere and see what sticks kind of approach, right? It was more of like, let's limit this. Maybe you allow one to be built per player, and then maybe you have a limit for the amount that you could build within a flag's territory, just some level of restriction. And it was the same thing with the turrets. I did like the turret idea because I liked how they gave you different things. Like you had the damage over time, you had the flat, you had the ice freeze, which was a little bit of damage, and then a slow effect, right? So kind of almost an upgraded barricade to an extent. But it was just the fact that, as you said, the map became too littered. And to me, it was more of like, why don't we rein that in? Why don't we limit and just give a little bit here and there instead of just allowing for so many to be built? And I think that really kind of muddied the water a bit with, one, what players thought was, oh, hey, there's this cool thing and we're going to be able to use it. And then every single time you zoom out a little bit on the map, all you see is just a sea of turrets, of barricades, and then the keeps mixed in here and there, and it just felt like, hey, it's just too much, right? We just need a little bit less.
I think the tuning is important, and I'm sure there's in pretty much every game there's like room to tune, like how strong is defense really? And I do think in Call of Dragons it airs a lot on the side of to the defender goes the spoils.
Yeah.
And to your point, like, hope you got there first, because if you ain't first, you're last. I don't know why I'm quoting Ricky Bobby.
Yeah. It's like the turtle didn't actually win this one. The hare did. So.
Yeah. So I don't like, to your point, when getting there first means you win. Because it's like, okay, so I guess nobody can sleep after this pass opening. That's what's happening now, right?
That's nice. It's like, Let me go get my Red Bulls. I'm gonna get my 4-hour energies. Let me go see if my dealer has any over the counters legally. Whatever. So okay. So let me switch gears for a sec here. So I want to talk real quick about the king queen system, because we were talking a little bit earlier about the migration capacities, ability for incoming, outgoing, and kingdoms needing to have a little bit more information. You had mentioned the thing about the migration preview that's being beta tested right now, and whether that's globally or if it's in however many kingdoms, where basically the king or not the king, but the leader, the R5 of an alliance that's looking to migrate somewhere, can click on that kingdom, and then there's this new migration preview button that's in the bottom right corner, and you can checkbox select the amount of players that you would bring with you, and then it'll tell you, here's the total amount of players, and then it'll move that bar, and maybe that bar goes from normal to active, maybe it goes from active to full, maybe it goes from active to crowded, but it'll show you if everyone migrated it right then and there in that moment, this is where you would move up. I do think, as you said as well, that is a good first step. However, one of the things that I've mentioned before is this idea of them kind of treating, and this is kind of a big opening, but I'm gonna hone it in, is that to me, and you said this before a little bit earlier in our conversation about that this is a kingdom builder. And my view on this is when we're really looking beyond that, it's like, I kind of look at it like this. Have you ever seen that TV show Lost, or The 100 by chance? Or are you familiar?
I did see some of 100.
Okay.
Yes.
So the idea for the 100, like Lost, is you basically have a group of people that get plopped onto a piece of land, and they're told to figure it out. Like, that's a very toned down and dumbed down version of it. But I kind of look at kingdom builders in this same way, which is almost kind of like them becoming small countries. And not to say that you're always looking at it like that, but some of these things will apply, which is, like, for example, when you're going to have people that are going to immigrate to your country from their country, it's not like anyone and everyone can just come in without, and again, in the realm of legality and everything, right? It's this idea that everyone kind of has to go through a process, right? An application, approval, etc. And my thing that I've said for a while now is that I just believe that kingdom leads, or the king queen, should have this ability to accept and deny every single person that wants to come in. And on top of that, you should also be able to accept groups if you want to. So if people want to apply as a number of players, you have this opportunity to do so. You can see what your total kingdom power is. And again, you mentioned that earlier. Being able to see that. Being able to also have the king or queen have that same migration preview beta option, right? So when they're checkboxing people's names off, that bar will move up or down. And it'll tell you this is the total amount of power you have coming in, this is the total amount of players, and then it'll move that bar based on you also checkboxing the people that you want to accept. So this way you have full autonomy over who can come in, what the amount of power you're going to accept, the amount of players you're going to accept, and then what level of kingdom status you're willing to take on. And that's just a part of it. I'm curious on what you think on that. If kingdoms should have generous, I guess it's a two-parter. Do you think that kingdom should have more tool utilization, more support tool options, to where they can be treated in some areas more autonomously, and then in some other ways maybe a little bit more automated. And then your thoughts on if Kingdom should have this ability to accept and deny every single person that comes in and really have a little bit more of like control.
Yeah, I mean, I actually don't care how it gets done, but I think the hopium should be removed.
Okay.
And there's like 100 ways to do that, right? But I think that is very important. And in Rise of Kingdoms, this problem is solved because you can calculate it for yourself anytime you want. And there's, third-party tools out there that'll tell you the power of other kingdoms. So you can even figure out your relative power to other people. So you can know exactly what you can bring in. And, I'm sure there's like 100 ways to approach it. But I think all hopium should be removed. Because what is a worse feeling than your group getting cut in half? Nothing, right? In this genre, there is actually no worse feeling than we thought we were going to this place, and not only are we not going to be able to go here now, and we have to find somewhere else to go in a panic with, and behind the 8 ball of everybody else who has their migrations locked up, but we don't get to play with the people we like to play with anymore. Like, there is no worse feeling. Losing is not a worse feeling. This is the worst feeling.
Well, and do you say that because it feels more as though there's this the socialization aspect is a lot more impactful and a lot more important than maybe the developers feel or believe it is, on how it can really be the soul-crushing defeat of players quitting or stopping to play or lowering activity just because they weren't able to play with their group or friends that they've been playing with for a while?
I think the developers have a pretty good understanding of the value of community, and certainly the community managers in Rise of Kingdoms have like observed that, like, oh, players say community is the most important thing. It's like, yeah, it is. So I think I get it, but I think certain systems, if improved and tweaked, can enable players to better form the kinds of communities they're trying to form, or remove the mystery from the process of forming the sort of kinds of kingdoms that they're trying to create. And, I think in defense of the developers on this one, like, they are looking to add features. And I think to the point of the conversation we're having here, like, we'd like to see it go further than where they've started. And hopefully that's a starting point where they add more.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so I guess this kind of leads me into one thing, which is, and this is something I've advocated for a while. So again, you've been a king of kingdoms. You have been in management positions. I've had my share in time, and time that I've not only spent being a part of other people's management teams, but doing it myself. Again, I guess so. It's, for me, one of, I think, the most biggest pain points of kingdom management is title giving. And I think this is just a dreadful space for how many people probably have nightmares and just horrors about this. But for so long in kingdom builders across the genre, and I should say at least in a number of them, you have always had to do this in a manual way. And this is excluding things like third-party apps, bots, etc., that will basically help to automate some of these processes that are just, number one, tirelessly unforgiving. They are not necessarily a complementary or complemented position. And it's more of, you need to make this work, or we are going to yell at you and tell you how bad you are at doing your job if you don't have people there around the clock 24/7 and able to give out titles. And again, I'm talking about some extremes. Of course, not every kingdom, and I'm sure not all the people are like that, but I'm sure we've all seen our fair share of what it's like to be in that level of a trench. Something that I've advocated for a while is being able to basically have the games develop some form of an automated queue system where you can have the game set up something that's basically a queue that you can join for each of the titles. And this takes away the entire manual labor aspect of it. That also leads to a lot of leadership and kingdom management burnout, which could also have detrimental repercussions to the state of a kingdom and whether or not players and or alliances may even opt to stay there, because leadership burnout, and then you start seeing this ripple effect of a number of other things that are not being taken care of, more tasks get backlogged, and it can really almost be the make or break of if that kingdom will continue to strive and succeed or not. And then we get this big announcement of them saying that they are working on developing a title queue system, which is, from what was described, kind of similar to what I've pitched in the beginning. One, I'm curious, what has been your experience with title giving, and how impactful have you really seen it on maybe the worst ends of when you don't have it all together, and or how much maybe pressure and stress the players in that kingdom can put on people and the management? And what do you think about them coming out and saying that they're developing? Because again, I don't know if Rock has a title queue system like what COD is talking about implementing that will eventually be coming.
Yeah, so I don't know. I used to work in product management, and I think, okay, so what problem are we solving here? The problem is that someone has to move a title around. My solution would just be give everybody the buff all the time and just make it a passive bonus. Now nobody needs to move a title around. And instead, those same people can focus on other things. But I also will add a weird twist to this, and I don't know what the answer is. And it doesn't actually keep me up at night, but let's say metaphorically it sort of does. Okay. Which is that, like, is the game actually made better by virtue of having a title person? Because the easy answer is like, no, of course not. Yeah. You have to wait for a title. But like, actually, does it in some sneaky way like somehow make the game better? I don't think so, but like, also there's a whole culture around title giving that evolves. You know what I mean? Like, and thanking your title giver, and the people who give titles get like special praise and recognition, and then they're like, might be something there to having these jobs that are like so simple but require attentiveness that like actually somehow, maybe in a way that's totally unexpected, improves the player experience. But I would just remove all titles and give everybody a passive buff that's equivalent and say, congratulations, you took the dragon, here's your extra buffs. Okay. And then like, now nobody needs to think about titles, and all that brain power can go to literally anything that actively improves the growth and status of the players in Alliance. Right? Like, my perspective is player leadership's time is extremely precious. Minimize the distractions and sort of things that become base workload, but in some ways meaningless. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that they can think about the things that actually are meaningful in very powerful ways for their communities, you know? But it's, we're going to get an automatic queue system. And I am happy for that as a definite improvement. Like, I don't even ask for titles anymore, bro. Like, not that there aren't people in my kingdoms that give them. I do this. I don't do this anymore in Rise of Kingdoms. Like, I don't do this in any city building war game anymore. Yeah. Unless I'm going to train like 50 million power in Rise of Kingdoms, right? Like, I'm not asking for a title because. But
you know this firsthand. You get people that are very extreme about this. Like, they take getting a title and stacking it with all the other buffs or timed out buffs that they're popping, or going and killing guards so they can grab this rune, and just making sure that they have optimized all their buffs to the max before they start. And so the title sometimes is the last one they need before they start doing it. And some people are really serious about this.
I used to be very serious about it. I mean, I wouldn't queue troops until I had the title on me, and that was in Rise of for a long time. And then I realized that maybe I valued my time more, and like, I would rather just pay $20 over the course of a year, you know, for an equivalent amount of speed ups for what I'm trying to save, right? Like, this is something, and you know, I've only got so much time here before I gotta take care of the kids and help out with some stuff here. But I think this is a huge mistake when people get sucked into like F2P value too much. Like, the real value is to go and find ways to earn more money, and then you can spend what you want in games. I'm not saying it's not fun to periodically find some cool ways to get F2P value, but like the people that go off the deep end, like bless their hearts, but the amount of time it takes for the amount of value you get, like, I don't know, man, like learn to write code and like get paid, and then you can spend the money, and like then you've learned a life skill and advanced your position in the game rather than purely advancing your position in the game. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's probably just a difference between those, because as we know, there are some people that are just hardcore. I'm just not going to spend anything. So for me, it is all about that free to play lifestyle. And then other people, like for me,
Yeah.
I remember I was free to play for probably 2 years before I spent $20 on the game, and at least for my time in Rock.
Well, I get the perspective of I'm not going to spend anything, but
Yeah.
actually what you're spending is your time, and your time is more valuable.
Yeah.
And I really like Alex Hormozy's quote here, and maybe this is a good place to end. Let me find this quote. It's going to take me just a minute. Hold up.
No worries. No, I think
It's a good one.
I think it's. I think it just really comes down to like the individual. But I understand the approach you're taking with, is the amount of time you're putting in and the amount of it and the amount of min-maxing that you're doing overall worth it, maybe compared to finding a means, if you're able to, of establishing some kind of a budget that maybe makes up for that, where maybe, you can get away spending $1 or $2 here or there, or over a number of days, if it accumulates to a certain amount or however much it is, that will save you those total amount of hours that you're going to put into the game, if you feel like that's more valuable than the time you're spending.
Why can't I find this quote? It was so good and so available. And now it's nowhere to be found. Oh, here it is.
Yeah.
All right, you ready?
Okay. Yeah, no, lay it on me thick.
Rich people buy time. Poor people buy stuff. Ambitious people buy skills. Lazy people buy distractions.
Okay.
Value your time very highly. Now, this game does so. That's not a way you can lose hundreds of hours of your life. Trust me, I would know. But I just saw that quote and I was like, oh, damn. Rich people buy time. Poor people buy stuff. Ambitious people buy skills. Lazy people buy distractions.
Oh.
Whoo, boy. But Alex Hormozy's a different breed, man. He's like he's trying to be, I think, a billionaire. I think that's what he's after. He's halfway there. So it's working for him. But he also says, if you want to live the life someone else leads, you've got to be willing to give up the same things that they gave up.
Yeah.
Something to that effect. And that may not be exactly true, but also, like, I don't know. It's easy to look at what other people have and potentially covet that. Yep. So whatever. I'm not trying to knock F2P. I'm trying to encourage everyone to better themselves, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And
essentially go out there, work a second job, then you can spend money in the game.
I don't know, Chisgule, you're missing out on a couple hours of speed ups every day. I'm like, man, F the speed ups. I got important shit I got to do.
Man, no, absolutely. Well, listen, Chiz, man, this has been an absolute blast, and I'm really happy we had an opportunity to sit down and talk about what feels like a number of areas about the state of the game, and diving into a few spicy topics as well for moments that we've had. But no, this has been an absolute pleasure. Great being able to pick your brain and have a nice back and forth. Anything you would like to end with? Shout outs, declarations, additional shots you'd like to fire off at people, where people can find you? Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed the opportunity to chat with you about this. I love talking about this kind of stuff, but don't get a ton of time to just sort of think about to actually talk about the state of the game with someone who's, obsessing about it as much as I am, and also has the background in Rise of Kingdoms and other games. But I think a lot of what I'm saying probably seems like shots fired. Like, there's only so many high-powered kingdoms, and like they're making these choices in this game. I'm not actually trying to beef with those kingdoms or the people that are running them, but I am trying to actually elevate the sort of state of the communities in this game. And it does probably come across as shots fired. And like, I guess to some extent maybe it is, but like, it's not personal, not actually going after anybody. I am pointing to the patterns and trying to predict the future. Okay. And the predictions aren't that hard to make because we've already seen this stuff before.
Absolutely. I appreciate you trying to, what's the word I'm looking for? You're trying to put out your inner Tom Cruise Minority Report. So thank you.
Oh, no.
Thank you for that.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my TED Talk. Now
Yes.
I need to go back to taking care of my 1-month-old baby. I appreciate you, dude. Until we chat again. All right?
No. Absolute pleasure, man. You take care and have a good rest of the night.
All right. Take care, bro.
Later all.